Let's go ahead and bow our heads and pray this morning. Father, we thank you for allowing us to freely worship you and just enjoy your love and your kindness and your joy. And we ask that you would be upon this meeting this morning, that you would fill the words, let the words out of my mouth be your words, and open our ears, our spiritual ears, that we might hear what you'd have us to hear this morning. Father, we ask that you would bless each and every one in here today, and that you would just allow us to continue to worship you in the Word now. And we praise you and we glorify you in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Well, we are in Exodus 20, and I want to try to get through 3 chapters this morning. So we're going to be here for a while. Okay.
That's all right. I got all day.
So remember last week we left off with God telling Moses to go back down the mountain and tell the people to stay back so they wouldn't have to die, right? And Moses argued with God for a little bit and said, no, I don't want to go back down. I already told him not to come to the mountain. And God says, go down and then you can come back up. So Moses went back down the mountain. He told the people, and this is where we pick up this morning, as Moses is at the bottom of the mountain talking to people, and then God decides to speak here while Moses is still at the bottom of the mountain. So God is going to speak to the whole congregation right now. Exodus 20, then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. So another way some people have broken this law of not having other gods before me is they'll say this, and I know we've all heard this before. Well, my God wouldn't do that, or my God wouldn't do something like that, or I just don't believe that God really would send people to hell, or I know God will understand, or this thing I'm doing is wrong, but God's got my back. So you are creating a God in your own image. And so you are putting another God above God. And that is not who God is. He tells us who He is in the Word. And those things are not Him. So I think we've all done it. And so I just say, just be careful, because we cannot put God in a box. And He is who He is because He is the I am, the God. Okay.
Agreed, I am.
Verse 4 says, you shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water underneath the earth. You shall not worship them, or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. So notice it says to not make an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven or above, or on the earth below in the water and all that. And some have taken this in a different way. They have taken it as to say, well, we can't take pictures, because that's an idol. We can't have a statue. We can't have a cross. We can't have a picture of Jesus in our church. We can't have any of these because it's an idol. What makes something an idol is what you do with it. He says, don't create these idols. Don't make these idols and worship them. So if you can have a cross, you can have a picture of Jesus, you can have horses in a picture on the wall over there. That's not an idol. It's what you do with it. If we bow down behind the horses over there, every morning we come in here and we say a little prayer to the horses, then that's making it an idol. But it's not an idol otherwise. It's what you do with it.
It's horse butts.
That's the board of directors.
That is. So God is talking about creating idols for worship. What did you say?
I said that's the board of directors. That's what it says on the schedule.
Yeah, that's our board of directors here at Cross T Cowboy Ministries.
Horse butts.
Horse butts. Okay. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Now, I got to stop here too. We're going to talk about this one a little bit. Okay, this does not stop with using the Lord's name as a cuss word, as we were all brought up to believe, which that is it too. That's taking his name in vain. It's also, if your image of God is anything other than all-powerful, all-knowing, all everywhere, merciful and a judge, and so on and so forth, then you are actually taking the name of the Lord your God in vain. If you say that your God wouldn't do these things like what we were saying earlier, then that's actually taking the Lord's name in vain, because his name is holy, and we've got to reverence that. We've got to fear God, because he is the ultimate. Okay? And if we anything other than that, we are taking his name in vain. So remember the Sabbath day, verse 8, to keep it holy. And Jesus is the fulfillment of the Sabbath. He says, I am the Sabbath. And he is our rest. We can rest in Jesus Christ. And so this is one of the only commandments that's not passed on to us in the New Testament, because Christ is our rest. And he says that he is our rest. Even though it's still a good idea to take one day off and not do anything in the week. Because God had said that in the very beginning. He goes, I created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day I rested from my creation. Therefore, you will work 6 days, and on the seventh day you rest. Whether your rest day is on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday or Saturday or Sunday, it doesn't have to be Saturday, the Sabbath day. It can be any day. Just take a day. And you'll live longer, you'll be happier, it will help you rejuvenate, and you'll work harder the next week if you at least have one day to just rest. Okay. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Verse 10 says, but the Sabbath day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourners who stays with you. So you couldn't even have your ox grind grain while you're sitting there watching him do that, because you're making your ox do work, and not even the animals could work on the Sabbath. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father. In verse 12 it says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. So this is the first commandment with a promise. So he says, you do this, and then I'll do this for you. So this is the first commandment with a promise. Ephesians 6:2 says the same thing. It says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Okay, verse 13 says, you shall not murder. And Jesus said, if you hate your brother, you've committed murder. You shall not commit adultery. Jesus said, if you look upon a woman with lust in your heart, you have committed adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servants, or his female servants, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This is keeping up with the Joneses, right? We've all heard of that. So that's what coveting is. Verse 18 says, all the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when all the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. There they said to Moses, speak to us yourself, and we will listen. So they saw this. They saw God speaking these words, and they heard lightning, or they heard thunders, and saw lightning and the cloud, and they were scared. And they said, we don't want God to talk to us anymore, please, please. You talk to God, and then you tell us what he says, okay? We don't want to do this. This is scaring us. All right? So you talk to God, you'll be the mediator, and you come tell us what he says. We don't want to hear it directly from God's mouth anymore. This is really scary. But let not God speak to us, or we will die. So they thought they were going to die. Because what he was saying, I'm sure every one of them had these things in their heart that they were doing. And so he was saying, don't do these things, and do these things. And they were all guilty of everything that he was saying. And so the wages of sin is death, right? And they didn't want to die listening to God tell them what not to do. So Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. So the whole purpose was to scare the sin out of them, right? To scare them so that they wouldn't sin. But we know, in the New Testament it says that the law wasn't a salvation piece. It was to show us, it was our schoolmaster to show us what right looks like, and that we can't keep it ourselves. There's no way we can do this ourselves. We can try, and we're supposed to try. We're supposed to try to do this, but we know that we can't do this for our salvation. And Jesus talks to a rich young ruler and says, the rich young ruler comes to him and says, well, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus goes through some of the laws and stuff, and he says, well, I kept those from my birth. And Jesus says, go sell all you have and give to the poor. And he walks away discouraged because he was a very wealthy man. And Jesus says it's hard for a rich man to enter into heaven. And it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And the disciples said, well, who can be saved then? And Jesus says, you can't be saved in your own self. Only God can save you. And only God can save that rich man. Only God can save us from our sins. So the Ten Commandments here is not, it's something that we should try to live by. But we are not to be saved by them. If you keep all these commandments to try to be saved, to be righteous within yourself, the Pharisees did that. They say, well, I keep all the commandments. I'm a righteous man. And this guy over here, he's a tax collector, he's a sinner, he's not righteous. Thank God I'm not like him. Well, that tax collector had the right idea, because he says, he beat his chest and said, forgive me, Lord, I am a sinner. And this righteous Pharisee missed the mark, because he thought he was doing what he needed to do because he was keeping the Ten Commandments. Well, he was missing some of them. He just didn't realize it, because we are so self-righteous, we don't think we can do any wrong. And that is, in and of itself, is wrong. And that is the pride of life. That is the pride that made Satan fall in the first place, because he thought he could be like the Most High God. But when we are self-righteous and we think we can do it ourselves, we don't need God, or there's something that we have to do with that to be saved, there's nothing we can do to be saved. Only God can save us. The only thing we can do, the only thing we have to do, is believe in Him. It says, you know, that our faith will save us, because our faith in Christ is what saves us. We can't do anything to save ourselves. So we can't keep the law. We should try, but not for salvation, but because it's the right thing to do. You see? So a lot of people will dismiss the law and say, well, the law isn't for us today. Well, that's not true, because there's going to be some things we're going to cover. If our government would just do this, we wouldn't have any of the problems we have today.
Amen.
And so we're going to go through some of that stuff, and I'll try to go through it slow enough to where we can all just kind of grasp that. And I think the early founding fathers, they saw that, and they tried to implement these things into our laws of this land. But then after a time, when we kick God out of the schools and we kick God out of the government, what's left is our own laws and our own abilities to make laws and stuff, and we miss this. And this is the foundation. This is what we should be looking at. Moving on, verse 21 says, so the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. You shall not make other gods beside me, gods of silver or gods of gold you shall not make for yourselves. So this was a test. God knows their future and what they're going to fall into and their idolatry that is going to cause them to eventually be scattered among all the nations. Okay? God sees that. So he come down on this mountain while Moses was still at the base of the mountain to test them, to prove to them that he is real and that you can't make a God that represents him, because they couldn't even see him. They'd have to make a mountain with cloud and lightning and thunders to represent him. They couldn't do that. Only God can do that. And so he's saying, fear me and don't do this. But do they get it? We shall see. You shall make an altar of earth for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. If every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones. For if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. So the altar must be a complete, all-natural altar. If you try to shape a stone to make an altar for me, make it all pretty and whatever, then he says, you will profane it. So there's nothing you can do to get closer to me, is what he's saying. The only thing you can do is take what I've already given you and put it in a way to where you can sacrifice on it, and that's going to get to me. Okay, so even in the Old Testament, God's saying there's nothing you can do to get closer to me. You can use what I've given you, and you can trust in me, and that's your salvation. Okay? So even the altar in the Old Testament, you couldn't do anything yourself. You couldn't cut it with your tools. Verse 26, and you shall not go up by steps to my altar, so that your nakedness will not be exposed on it. So even God was looking out for them in the future, because you know, the tunics and stuff that they wore, if they were to make this giant altar and go up on steps, then the people down below could look up and, you know, the rest of the story. So God says, don't do that. Don't make your altar so high that people could look up your tunic. Okay. God knows us better than we even know ourselves. Exodus 21. Now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. So now he's going to talk about some other laws, and these are the laws that a judge would judge between people. But he gave the people this so that they could judge amongst themselves first, and that they could know what's right and what's wrong. And they would, but this is the ultimate foundation for their law. All right, so now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payment. So if you buy a Hebrew slave, so that we don't understand the whole buying and selling of slaves and all that. Like, they had this in their culture because they didn't have the bankruptcies, they didn't have debtors' prisons like we had in the early years. They didn't have, if a guy couldn't afford to, if he lost his house, he lost everything he had, rather than to be homeless, he could sell himself to for another brother in the Hebrew faith and become their slave. Well, this is like an indentured servant, basically. So he could sell himself, and in 7 years, maybe he could have gathered enough money and got back on his feet, and then after 7 years, he's free to go, and he could start over, right? So this is kind of like a kind of a welfare, almost, without it being a dirty word. It was kind of a welfare for them, to kind of help them out. So it wasn't that they're mean and they take these slaves to work. No, they were like a hired help. So they could, but they were a contract hired help. And they had to be there for 7 years. But after 7 years, they had to let them free. So they couldn't keep them. So if if he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. And that's all self-explanatory. Obviously, if you're alone, you go back alone. If you have a wife, you go back with your wife. Now, this is where it starts to get a little Sketchy. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, because he's property, and the wife is property, so she stays with the children. But there's a way to do this differently. And he shall go out alone. So he has to leave his wife and his children behind that he got while he was in slavery. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife and my children, I will not go out as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God. So he's going to bring him before God like we do a dedication. So he's going to dedicate this guy to God. Then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, or awl, not an owl, with an awl. An awl is a little, like a nail with a handle. So he puts his ear to the doorpost, if you can picture this. Puts his ear out there, and he takes an awl, and he goes, bam! Puts a hole in his ear, and he shall serve him permanently. So this is a representative. He is pierced, and so he is now a slave forever. It's a bond servant. So this servant is now called a bond servant. And when we surrender to Christ, we become his bond servants, because we say we love our master and we want to serve him forever. We don't want to be free men. We want to serve him forever, so we become bond servants. Titus 1, Paul, a bondservant of God, and an apostle of Jesus Christ, according to the faith of God's elect, and the acknowledgement of the truth, which accords with godliness. Wow, that is hard. Okay, anyway, Titus 1:1 says, I, Paul, a bondservant. James 1:1, I, James, a bondservant. 2 Peter 1:1, I, Simon Peter, a bondservant. And Jude 1:1, I, Jude, a bondservant. They all knew what this meant. They all became bondservants, and that's what we become when we wholly trust in him and we turn ourselves over to him. We become his bondservant. So that's where they get this from, is this in Exodus right here. So Exodus 21:7, if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. So after 7 years, it doesn't apply to her. I don't understand this, but maybe you can do some more research on this for me and let me know. But she doesn't go free. So there's different categories for the women. So if she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. So if she displeases him, then she can go after 7 years. She can be redeemed. All right. So, all right. If he does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his unfairness to her, though. So there is this safety net. So he has this slave, this female slave. He doesn't have to let her go, but he can let her go, but he cannot sell her to a foreign people. He cannot sell her to a foreign land. All right, if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he will not do these three for her, then she shall go out for nothing, or without payment of money. So he can let her go. If he's going to act different towards her, if he's going to treat her differently, then he can let her go. She can go. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. So if he didn't commit murder, he killed a person, he could go to a place called a city of refuge. We're going to see that all later played out, and God's going to tell the Levites that your inheritance are these cities of refuge, and that's where these murderer, or not a murderer, but a killer will go if they kill someone to protect them from the avenger of blood. There's an avenger of blood in this culture that if you kill my brother, it's my obligation to kill you. That's why we have so many problems in the Middle East. Because everybody's brother's been killed. Now everybody's trying to kill them. Anyway, but God had this. He knew how they thought, so He was going to kind of help them out. So He's got these cities of refuge. So a guy doesn't commit murder, but he accidentally kills someone. Then the killer can go to the city of refuge, and he can be safe from the avenger of blood. They cannot kill him in this place. Okay. If, however, a man acts presumptuously toward his neighbor, so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar, that he may die. So if you commit murder, if you have a premeditated murder, you do this out of murder. You know what murder is. So if you do that, you will die. And you can't even come to my altar. See, they had another deal. If a guy kills somebody or does something wrong, he could go and grasp onto the altar of God, and they couldn't kill him, right? So he would hang onto the altar for mercy. But God says, you can't even hang onto my altar for this. If you murder someone, they can drag you out and then they stone you to death. So that's capital punishment, murder, an eye for an eye, or a life for a life. Okay, this was instituted clear back after the flood. Remember, God told Noah that now if someone dies or is killed, then life will be expected from that killer, from that murderer. Okay, verse 16, he who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall be put to death. How about that? Let's kill the kidnappers. I bet you there'd be a lot less kidnappers in the world today, because they'd be dead. All right, he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. If men have a quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but remains in bed. So he even gets down to the nitty gritty here, just the details. So just think of this. All right, so you knock somebody out and you hurt him bad enough, didn't kill him, but he stays in bed. Well, if he gets up and walks around outside on his staff, then he who struck him shall not go unpunished. Or shall go unpunished, sorry. So he will not be punished for striking a man, putting him in the hospital, as long as he can get around. But he shall only pay for his loss of time. So he has to pay for any lost time that he has. He couldn't work. So he has to pay for his wages for the time that it takes him to get better. And he shall take care of him until he's completely healed. This is accidental. This is our accidental policy here, accidental health policy here. The guy that hurt him is responsible for him.
We'll talk later.
Affleck. If a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. So he shall be punished, right? If, however, he survives a day or two, so if he dies, he's got to be punished. But if he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. So you can beat him almost to death. Okay, just don't quite kill him. Okay, if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet there is no injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. So that's pretty cut and dry. You know, you get hurt, you have your baby, but no harm, no foul. Nobody's hurt. Baby lives. The woman don't bleed to death. The guy that hit her still gets fined by the husband, but it's just a fine. You don't have to be put to death. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life. So if, for instance, you hit a pregnant woman and she miscarries and that baby dies or the mother dies, you are to be put to death. That's life for life. Okay? Eye for eye. Tooth for tooth. Hand for hand. So say the hand gets cut off, they cut your hand off. Foot for foot. Burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, so he plucks his eye out, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. So that's pretty good, you know. And if he knocks out a tooth of his male or female slave, he shall let him free on account of his tooth. Okay, well that's fair. Okay, if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. Okay, so I have a bull, or an ox, or a cow that has horns or longhorn, and that animal kills a neighbor. They'll stone the animal to death, and it's going to sit out and rot. We're not going to eat this animal. Well, there's reasons by that. There's things that can cause an animal to go mad, and so you wouldn't want to eat their flesh anyway. Well, God protects these people by not allowing that animal to be eaten, period. Okay. But the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. If, however, an ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. Because you've used an instrument to kill someone. It's negligent homicide. Okay? So he shall be put to death. Capital punishment for that. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. So, there's a clause here. He shall be put to death unless the person that would be avenging his blood says, well, if you pay me 100 shekels of silver, then you can live. Okay? Alright, so whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rules. So the same rules apply. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. If a man opens a pit, or digs a pit and does not cover it over, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead animal shall become his. So I dig a pit, and my neighbor's sheep falls in the pit and dies. I have to pay for the sheep to my neighbor, but I get to keep the sheep. Now I can eat it. See, I just bought that dead animal, so I can eat it now. So if one man's ox hurts another's so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide its price equally, and also they shall divide the dead ox. So my ox kills your ox, we sell my ox because it kills your ox. We sell it, divide the money equally, and then we both get to cut the dead ox in half, and we each get our halves. That's pretty fair. Or if it is known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not confined it, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall become his. So my ox kills your ox, except I knew that my ox is a killer ox. So I got to pay for your ox, and then you get to keep my ox, and you get to keep your dead ox. Okay. Or I pay for your ox with my ox, and you still get to keep your dead ox and eat the whole thing. You don't have to share anything with me. Okay. I lost my place. Where was I at? Oh, okay. Exodus 22. That ends that book. Okay, so Exodus 22, verse 1. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. If the thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. So if you walk into my house and you steal something from me and I catch you in the act, I can shoot you and nothing happens to me. Pretty good law. If the sun has risen on him, there will be the blood guiltiness on his account. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. So I catch you the next day, I can't shoot you now. Otherwise, I'm guilty of murder, because it's after the fact. You can't just go around shooting people for stealing stuff. Okay, but if I catch you, I can now sell. I can now get restitution from what you stole from me. If you don't have anything to give me restitution, I sell you as a slave. So I'm going to get something, and now you're in slavery. Okay, so if the verse 4 says, if what he stole is actually found alive in his possession, whether an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. Okay, so this is the restitution. So I find they're alive. He pays double. If he can't pay, then he's a slave. I sell him as a slave. If he has killed it, then the sheep, remember it's 5, and the ox is 4 times, or vice versa. Vice versa. So if that's the case, then if he can't pay, then he is sold as a slave. Number 5, if a man lets a field or a vineyard be grazed bare and lets his animal loose so that it grazes in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If a fire breaks out and spreads to the thorn bushes, so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field itself is consumed, he who started the fire shall surely make restitution. So those are pretty cut and dry. I'm going to take a drink. My throat is dry. If a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep for him, and it is stolen from the man's house, if the thief is caught, he shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges to determine whether he laid his hands on his neighbor's property. So Mr. Kelly gives me a table saw, and some thief comes in and steals my table saw, and he's not caught. Well, now I got to go before the judge and see if I had anything to do with this thief stealing his table saw. Okay? For every breach of trust, whether it is for ox or donkey or sheep or clothing, or for any lost thing about which one says, "Oh, that was mine," the cause of both parties shall come before the judges. He whom the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. So let's say Mr. Kelly says that he loaned me a table saw, but he really didn't. And he says that it got stolen, and it really didn't. And we go before the judges, and the judges say, well, they find out the truth that he said that he gave me a table saw, but I didn't ever get a table saw, and no thief stole that table saw. He pays double. How about that? So don't falsely accuse someone of something they didn't do. Thank you. So if a man gives his neighbor a donkey or an ox, Okay, so if a man gives a donkey or an ox or a sheep or anything animal to keep for him, and it dies or is hurt or is driven away while no one is looking, an oath before the Lord shall be made by the two of them that he has not laid hands on the neighbor's property. So he's got to come up and say, he's got to make an oath saying, no, I didn't shoot your animal, okay? And its owner shall accept it. So if he promises that he didn't hurt it, then there's no restitution. You got to accept it. And he shall not make restitution. But if it is actually stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is all torn to pieces, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn to pieces, because it wasn't his fault. He got away, wolf tore it to pieces, and so he brings it and says, hey, I'm sorry, it wasn't my fault, so he has to accept that. All right, so if a man borrows anything from his neighbor, and it is injured or dies while its owner is not with it, he shall make full restitution. If its owner is with it, he shall not make restitution. If it is hired, it came for its hire. Now, you have to think about this one for a little bit. So I'm going to give you modern terms here. So in other words, I hire you and your combine to come over to my place and cut my wheat. You're driving along in my wheat field, and you fall in a sinkhole and your combine dies. So you and your combine are hired to me. I don't have to pay you restitution because you and your combine were hired. That's what insurance is for. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and lies with her, he must pay a dowry for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the dowry for virgins. So, the shotgun wedding, right? But if the dad's like, he ain't worthy for a shotgun wedding, then the guy still has to pay dowry as if he was going to marry her.
Alimony.
Alimony. Right? Alimony and child support. So true about that. You shall not allow a sorceress to live. That's pretty cut and dry. A sorceress is someone who is a witch, someone who casts spells, someone who does sorcery, does tarot cards, does all these things is considered a sorceress. Dabbling in the black arts, that is a sorceress. They were to kill them. They were to be stoned to death. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be utterly destroyed. Not just put to death, but utterly destroyed. So he is very serious about no other gods before me. He is a jealous God, and he will destroy you if you have other gods before him. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And this is a neat principle. So you could also say, don't be an alcoholic because you grew up in an alcoholic family and you were beaten as a child, so why would you want to do that? Why would you want to pass that on, right? Or don't be an abuser because you were an abuser. You were abused as a child, or you grew up that way, so don't be what you hated growing up. So don't become what has hurt you. So don't abuse others because you yourself was abused. You know what it's like, so don't do it. So that's kind of a neat principle. We have the obligation to break the cycle of our lives. If we were abused, don't be an abuser. That's your obligation to break that cycle. Okay, verse 22, you shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict him at all, and if he cries out to me, I will surely hear his cry, and my anger will be kindled, and I will kill you with the sword. He will kill you, okay? Because one of his children tattled on you. All right? He takes that seriously. And your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. So there. So, if you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. That's interesting. So when you loan money to a brother, not to charge him interest, not to be a creditor, and that's to these people anyway. At least to the Jews, they are not to charge each other interest, because this is to them, but we could apply it to ourselves too. So when I loan someone money, if I have a money to loan, I don't charge them interest, and usually it's not a loan anyway, it's a gift. If they happen to pay me back, then bonus. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you are to return it to him before the sun sets. For that is his only covering. It is his cloak for his body. What else shall he sleep in? And it shall come about that when he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am gracious. And so there again, he's going to get tattled on. So when we take something in pledge, so like collateral, let's say that's collateral. We take this guy, so a cloak would be this guy's only covering. He's poor anyway. You're going to take the coat off his back as a pledge. Well, God's like, if you're going to do that, I wouldn't do that, because you're going to have to give it back to him that night. Because if he goes cold that night, that's on you. You shouldn't have taken that as a pledge. So don't take someone's house away from them as a pledge, because God will judge you for that. Verse 28, you shall not curse God, not curse a ruler of your people, or nor curse a ruler of your people. So we're not supposed to curse the president. Even a bad president, we're not supposed to curse. So you shall not delay the offering from, because, all right, so let me stop there. Because whoever is in power, God put there. Right. We've had some bad ones in the past, and I had to serve them because I'm in the military, and I didn't always like to. I didn't like the orders that we had. I didn't like the things that they passed down, the whatevers. I didn't like that, but I had to do that because God put them in power, and that is the ultimate authority, and so we have to respect our leaders.
Amen.
We have a choice that we can vote for our leaders, but however the vote comes out, know this, God still put them in office. Okay, you shall not delay the offering from your harvest and your vintage, so your vines, your grape harvest. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Now remember, this is back from the when they come out of Egypt. Remember, the firstborn are dead that didn't have the sign over the doorpost. So if the Passover, Passover angel come by, he killed everybody, all the firstborn in that household that didn't have the sign of the blood over the doorpost. Well, and then after that, God said, well, now after this, from this point on, whoever breaks the womb, or the firstborn son, is to be mine. It's mine. So he says, give your firstborn to God, and he doesn't want you to sacrifice your firstborn. He wants you to sacrifice an animal instead of your firstborn, and it's all symbolic of the Passover lamb. And who is our Passover lamb? The firstborn is Jesus Christ, and he gave himself for us, and so he is our Passover lamb. But God wanted these people to keep this in mind, and so all the firstborn of their flocks, of their people, the firstborn sons, they all had to give them to God. So that's where this is. You shall do the same with your ox and with your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. So the sheep and the ox, for 7 days it feeds, and then on the 8th day we have barbecue. You shall be holy men to me. Therefore you shall not eat any flesh torn to pieces in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. So that concludes the 3rd chapter. We got through them all. So that was a lot of stuff to take in. But if we took some of these principles and applied it to our laws and our lawmakers today, things would be a little different. And if a kidnapper was killed for kidnapping someone instead of whatever they get, sometimes they don't get a whole lot, then things would change. Because kidnapping somebody's kid for money or whatever would now not be worth the hassle, right? Okay. So with that, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And may the Lord watch over you and prosper you as you walk in his ways. And may you all be blessed throughout the week. Amen.
Amen.
As far as food goes, this is what's the menu, based on the fact that
only load it to a certain degree, and then it just pops off, and everything gets cold. So, in spite of that, what we've done is Mr. Kelly is up there. He will come to Colorado to visit with us. That's Mr. Kelly. He made chili, meat with no beans, and it's got spice. So if you're a spicy type, go for that. If you're not, you can go for the one that Vince, his son, managed to help me with to season it. But he said, you probably want to keep it a little mellow. So it's mellow, and it's sitting on the other side of the coffee pot. Now, there are also hot dogs, which right now Mr. Kelly is taking, because remember, we only have 2 circuits. So one circuit's in the back, one circuit's in the front. So we kept the hot dogs hot or warm by putting it up here. But now we'll be getting ready for our jam, which starts at 1:30. Sometimes the musicians start showing up about 1. You might want to talk to some of them, get to know them. They are amenable to playing in different places. So if any of you, especially the Colorado people, the Wellington contingency, if you want them to come and play, you need to talk with them. Okay, so that's a little bit of information. So the menu is chili with no beans, regular beans with meat in it, potato salad, chips. The drinks are in these coolers right over here, and there's soda and water. Okay, and enjoy yourself for a good hour until we
Is this
get
your
going.
phone number?
These other church people come from different places to be part of the jam, and so they have to travel all the way across the city to get here. So it takes time. We have to take
You should write your phone number on there.
So what she's saying is eat
They brought pie.
and stick around.
Hey, Dustin.
That's easy to do.
Thanks for the water. So,
You said you.
it was getting dry.
Hey, I got a question.
I couldn't find my pen. I know I had one, but I don't know where.
So actually, he was telling him that they.
I should have went over there and I probably could have found a pen.
He's coming there.
When every knee will bow and every tongue will confess who he is. That's right.
But that's how he grew up Orthodox.
Oh, really?
And
Get a pen.
we always looked at him as a person of no You won't believe this, but the rabbi told me that he was like from the I did.
We are not. He might.
In Isaiah 53.
1754. Oh, okay, it is right. Okay, gotcha.
Exactly.
And if you read it, and then study the names, the first 10 names, give it away. Man, mortal sorrow.
Good sermon.
Yes, I love that too. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, it's right there in Genesis.
So if you read it for yourself,
Yeah.
you know it's a person, it's not nation.
No, it isn't. And
Oh,
it
it was
just,
great.
I could just
My
see that, you know
hearing
what, it's
isn't
been an awakening in so
100%.
many that has
I
come
have
to
trouble with
awaken.
this year.
But you know what? I missed one word out of maybe 100 or 200. That's all I ever missed. Yeah, he's got a distinct voice.
But now,
It was
I don't know about
You had it.
on Wednesday night.
Oh, God.
I'll lay on this side.
I'll speak.
But I can't hear my neighbor snoring.
Oh! That's funny.
You guys
Because you
Yeah,
allow.
yeah, you kind of met when I came in.
A lot of people try to put their two into it.
Yeah, well, I know a few men that,
I don't want to hear a
first
man.
name and last name.
At the commentary.
I had a brother and his last name.
Sometimes I use commentaries, I'll read through and I'll be like, Lord, I'm not getting anything here. Can you help me out? You know? And then sometimes I'll just
I'll get a chance to
a couple of commentaries on it.
be talking to Dan, so it's okay.
And so then it kind of gets the wheels turning and stuff, but I try not to. Because I don't want. What's the Lord speaking to me? And if it seems a little
Well, commentary is just a start. But if you really want to know what the Bible says, the Bible will tell you.
exactly the Bible in Genesis. I say that all the time.
But don't do a commentary and say, okay, this is what it means, when the Bible is contradictory. No, because there's no contradiction in the Bible. Like the white Indian, because you're taking it out of context.
The symbolism in the Bible is told what it's meant earlier. So if you have a symbolism here, then go before that somewhere, maybe even in Genesis, and find out what that symbolism is, and it'll tell you. You know, you don't have to have somebody. Well, I think it's this. No, because it just said right now what it is. Like the birds of the air, it's always that's not good. The birds are always of a demonic presence or whatever. So mustard seed,
The seeds are not always water.
yeah.
And we have cornbread here, we have regular French bread here.
So the other thing is, okay, when you go through the Bible, what helped me most is it allegory or is it literal? If it's literal, hey, don't try to make it unanalogy.
Chuck Missler says, you can't say you take the Bible literally. You can say I take it seriously. Because there's some things that aren't literal, obviously. They're allegories or synonyms, whatever. But you've got to know where that's what it is when it's talking. But if you take it seriously, what it says, and it's true. I take it very seriously.
So, and also here, we do not like cheese.
But there again, you gotta realize, is it an allegory or is it actual what it is? Is it literal? And you take it all literal.
That's okay.
You're taking it all
And they want
allegory.
and then so we have anything all the time.
Well, there's a lot of things that people take in spiritual lines.
Since last week,
And it's okay.
Man, you're dicking! Oh, you should position.
Yeah, for sure.
And what really tickles me is they say, oh, the Jews.
well, see, they get all this.
Well, maybe the Bible says the Jews, but what it is referring to is the religious.
Exactly.
Not the Jews. Some Jews are followers.
Most of all the follower, all his disciples in the beginning was Jews. Come on, people. It wasn't until, the lady, the gal that come in and she wanted her child healed. And Jesus was like, well, I'm here for the children of the Lord, not the dogs. But he still healed her. That's right. And then, it opened up to the
away, so it's back there somewhere.
he come here first, too.
Well, she probably took it out of the box and put it
Well,
up.
and, I think over the years,
For the people, then who did he die for?
You know, in
He
the
made it
early
change for the
church,
Jews because we were so misled at that time. Yeah. We were doing everything backwards.
I hear you.
Hoping God for the war. He said.
Yeah, eat.
I eat. Oh, in the early, the church, the congregation, whatever church,
No, that's spicy here.
they thought they dismissed the Jews. You know, they dismissed Israel and said, well, they rejected us. So now we're new Israel, so it's replacement theology, and they taught that for years. And
Right back here.
that is such a heresy. It's so-
Okay.
No, you have to go back to Genesis to understand. It's not about, it doesn't, the Jewish race isn't any better than anybody else. He just chose them to bring his Messiah through. You had to have a line.
What I said is, we're the chosen people. Why couldn't you choose somebody else?
Right? Because that just puts a big target on you. A big bullseye on that whole race of people. And Satan's been trying to destroy that race since it began.
If you're adopted in,
Hey, when you're Thanksgiving or Christmas and there's only one store open, you get what they got. You like it.
That's thinking because Jesus
he was not a Levite.
No.
He was of the tribe of Yehuda.
So are you fluent in Hebrew?
When I did these scrolls in Denver, I was up there reading and people just, I mean, I like to talk with people around me when I was reading it off of the scrolls.
So there's so each Sabbath there's a reading in the Torah,
Right.
and that's per date, right? You can know what the date. So what's the reading for this next feast coming up? The Feast of Trumpets. What's that?
I know.
That's in the fall. So
Right.
the next feast
Well, not yet.
is a Jewish feast, it's not a Lord's feast.
No, I know.
Jewish feast. You're aware of that.
Yes. What's that?
Monica?
Okay.
And onions, chopped up onions.
That's for the Lord.
Out, up there. Hey,
And Irving's coming up.
line.
Okay, remember Esther?
But I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
That's what we Okay, that was where
I understand.
the people of Persia and Haman, the one what we supposed to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
His
was a,
name was mentioned. He tried to persecute the Jews and kill them.
Okay, cool.
And he was of the tribe that was supposed to be destroyed, utterly destroyed. Saul didn't do it.
And Esther had that's where it's from.
To commemorate what she did.
And Hanukkah, people say, well, that's still back to
Right there. This way? Yeah, that one right there.
the Maccabees
No, right here.
in the royal national days. No,
So what's that one?
that's what a lot of people believe, but that's not actual. It
That's
goes
what I
back, is going back to the rededication of the tabernacle.
When? During that time? Okay.
They were my last if it did or not, it doesn't make any difference. Because the Feast of Tabernacles is what?
Oh, yeah.
When do we think that Jesus was born? During the Feast of Tabernacles. Why? you exercise on the east face. During Christmas, 8 days later.
That's a good point, yeah. When is the Feast of Tabernacles?
That's in the fall. Usually around October.
Okay. One which would explain the shepherds being out in the fields, because in December they're not out in the fields, they're at a game.
We do a Bible study Wednesday. You know the Scott Carpenter? He used to do the Cowboy church. It's a regular church.
Oh, Scott Carter.
Carter.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he does, and he comes, and sometimes he gives his interpretation for the Jewish. So you might sometimes want to hear, but you're welcome. It's Wednesday, 6 p.m., and we have a meal afterwards. It's Scott Carter.
Okay.
And it's good, but it'd be nice to get your perspective. But I don't know, in war countries.
I work till 5 usually.
Okay,
So
this
if I
is
could-
down at Wellington, at Zion Lutheran Church.
Okay, I'll get all that information. I'll get all that Text me your name, and that way I'll have it in the text. And I'll text you back.
Well, I'll do it. I'll give you two of them. Because I got a main line.
Okay, then I'll just go to front.
Dan, C-A-N, C-U-N-A-R,
D or G? G-U-N. Home phone number?
568 or 970 568 7355. Thank you for getting the 970. I don't think that in my head.
Is it a 970?
Yeah.
No, I know. They know we can add it.
There's some
Oh, yeah.
sorry to say.
I mean, you know, I'm one of the church states.
So what do you do, Dan?
Not a whole lot. I'm retired.
Awesome.
But when I worked, I was a truck driver.
No me.
Down here now.
Yeah, chilies or anything like that.
I will have Is that all right?
You want my email?
Dan Gunther, 1950 at
Yeah, we used to set the sheet. It was like for a week at a time. went on Friday night. The doors were closed and shut. And we didn't leave until Saturday night. Because our day would be the first time started.
Right.
Where's it Sam that gets them all good?
Stirrup and side by side, we crossed the mountains and the valleys wide. We came to Big Muddy, then we forded the flood on the Tennessee Mare and the Tennessee Stud. Heard a little baby on the cabin floor, I love that girl with the golden hair and the Tennessee Stud, I love the Tennessee Mare. The Tennessee Stud was long, the color of the sun in his eyes.
I'm not trying to be rude, but well, she put her back. We had a bowl, and she said, "Oh my gosh, are you crazy?"
Picture your home phone number.
No, yeah, I don't have any email on my home
So the 7255,
Yeah.
There we go.
I had to do something different. They loved it. I like it. Tomato sauce. It's gross. Gross. So I sliced it good. Well, I don't really follow those things. Didn't know what I'm making. I use a lot of green chilies. And who I'm cooking for will have green chili if you
my name, the email, and the website.
No, okay.
There you go. Perfect. All right, Dan.
cook all that.